Can you hear me still?
Yep.
Okay. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and get this started. It's 11 o'clock, so thanks for attending. This is Brad from Motion Media, by the way. We are authorized reseller of Modo and all Foundry products, as well as many other things. So definitely take a look at our website if you haven't already, and we can probably help you out with any software, hardware stuff that you guys need. So basically, if you guys have questions during the presentation, you can type them in the chat window. Greg's going to be busy presenting, so I'll try to answer them if I can. Otherwise, we'll just save them to the end and kind of go through them as much as we can. So with that, I'm just going to go ahead and pass it over to Greg, and we'll get started.
Hey, how's it going, guys? There you go. I get to see my Steam window. If you ever want to hop into our Modo Steam Edition chat room, by all means, hop in. We answer a lot of questions in there and just discuss general 3D stuff. All right, so just want to say quickly thanks to Motion Media for putting together the webinar. What we're going to be going through today is a couple things in Modo 801, the latest release of Modo from the Foundry. And we can't go through everything just because, unfortunately, we don't have enough time. And to articulate that very quickly, I want to show you all the new features that are in Modo 801. This would take like over 3 hours to go through everything. But right here, through our inline help system, we have a list of all these new features. So for modeling, new snapping tools. Those of you who are coming over from other applications like Maya that might have tried our snapping in the past and said, why doesn't it work the way I want it to? Guess what? Now it works the way you want it to. UDIM workflow, as you can see, for bringing multiple UDIMs back and forth from applications like we have, like Mari, way streamlined. Like if you're bringing in 16 images that need to be tiles, it'll automatically assign the correct tiles and treat it all as one image as opposed to 16. Shatter command to shatter meshes, UV unwrap tool, new features in UV unwrap. UV symmetry, merge UVs, transform normals, clay brush. I mean, that's modeling right here alone, and that's just one single section. Rendering. Rendering has undergone some great improvements. Our renders are faster. You have more versatility. You can combine methods of rendering like interpolated GI methods along with brute force methods like Monte Carlo to come up with what we consider hybrid rendering, which allows you to get the best of both worlds, the speed that you find from interpolated GI and the accuracy and precision that you find from Monte Carlo. So you have even more options when setting up your renders inside of Modo. And as you can see here, many more features for rendering as a whole. Lots of speed ups, lots of quality improvements in 801. Baking, we read on baking considerably. We have caged baking, rounded edge baking, independent bake resolution, which is nice. So you're not stuck to the resolution of your render when you're setting up your baking. It'll be two separate things. Less clicks, very important thing as far as workflow is concerned. Animation, I'm going to show you a few quick animation things. It's not my thing, but we're really proud of our animation tools in 801, and it's also something that we feel a lot of people don't know a lot about, is how good our animation tools are, especially the approach that we took, which are traditional animation techniques applied into a 3D animation program. Interface, lots of nice little interface improvements, showing of inactive UVs. As you dig into Modo, you'll notice you can have lots and lots of different UV sets, active and inactive, and it's nice to be able to see all those in context. And lots of general improvements, such as color management. Color management is phenomenal inside of 801 now. It makes life a lot easier. You don't have to go in and adjust gamut settings for images you import. Modo figures it out all for you. And hair and fur tools and node-based shading. This is another big one. We will touch on that in this webinar. Node-based shading in 801 is extremely cool. And the reason why is because it's not just node-based shading. It's node-based shading and also our shader tree. You can combine the two together. And with our node-based shading method that we've set up, you can do some outrageously cool things that typically I would associate with a tool that would need to be developed as a standalone. Like, for instance, being able to draw curves on a surface in 3D space and have them project onto that background surface. So you actually have almost like a little mini illustrator for 3D inside of a 3D application. And I'll show you some of that stuff just to kind of articulate how cool it is. But first off, let's start talking about some of the animation improvements in 801. As you can see here, I have this character we call Ace Hero. Ace Hero is included in the standard content that you will find for 801, and you can go ahead and when you download the trial, you can download the content, check that out. And it's also part of this kind of demo. There's a much broader version of that in our Spotlight series, which if you go with the production evaluation of Modo, which is $25, it includes 6 hours of training for 801 and shows you how to go through producing the following final animation. So I'll just open up the final animation here just to show you. As you can see, lots and lots of keyframes, but Modo has made it extremely easy to produce very complex animations. So I'll go ahead and play this back really quickly. And as you can see, we have a very simple animation running of Hero is looking around right now. Oh no, he spotted something, and he's throwing his discus out. Turns around, grabs it, and comes back into the hero pose. So very basic animation to show off a lot of these features, but I want to show you how easy it was to set this up. And this is done largely using a new tool in 801 called our spacing chart. And so let me go ahead and open up this panel right here. As you can see, we have these nice quick access panels to access various features inside of Modo, but at the same time keep a very open, friendly interface for animators to interact with. And I need to open this panel on up, and I want to come back to the first scene that is associated with setting up the animation for this character. And if I scrub through the timeline down here, you can see absolutely nothing happens. And the reason for that is what I want to do first, before I begin animating this character, is I want to identify an actor, and I want to identify actions for an actor. And so you see down here we have actors and actions. And I want to come down here to my guide, and thank you for auto-saving so quickly for me, Modo. Come down here, select that group, right-click on this, and I'm going to select the item hierarchy. That's the guide. I'm sorry, actually I don't want that one. I want the rig. So right-click on the rig and select item hierarchy, and that is going to select the entire rig for me because I want all these items to be keyframed for my actor. And so I'll come over here and say actors, create a new actor. I'm going to name that Ace Hero because that is his name. This model was done by John Hayes, by the way. Phenomenal artist known by Zugak on the forums. Great character artist. And I want to set up an action for my actor. And so I want to create a new action, and I'll just name that Hero Stuff, Hero Motion, whatever, and make sure Transfer is toggled on because Transfer will apply all the keyframes to this actor and this action. And now that I have this actor in action in place, again, nothing is actually happening, but I could go ahead and open up my spacing chart just to have it in place here, move that on around. And what I want to do is I want to start setting up some of my basic poses. And since we're in kind of a generic T-pose right here, kind of like a 45 T-pose, some of the things I want to do is just kind of get him looking a little bit more natural. Typically what I would do is get him into a really dynamic hero pose to start off with, you know, something like you might find Captain America, something like that, you know, showing off all of his muscles, really nice dynamic pose. But you just pull these items into place using these locators. And this character was rigged using our Auto Character Setup Kit, our ACS kit by Lucas Pizzera. And so setting up a rig like this, real easy. You don't need to be a genius at rigging in general, but just use some basic controls to get your character into place. And now once you've got that basic pose in place, we actually want to establish poses that could be reusable. And so since I've got, you know, the arms down and stuff, like I probably want to start bending the hand into place because every superhero always is super intense and has his hands in a fist ready to, you know, go beat something up or save somebody's life. All right, so if I want to start making some poses, for instance, for the hand, I'm going to go ahead and select this locator right here. And as you can see, as I select on this locator, we get these channel halls. This is actually part of the rigging setup in Modo. You can set up channel halls that will show up in your viewport very quickly and easily. And I can go ahead and start playing around with things like finger spread. These are all set up by default with the ACS kit, and start tweaking components into place. But I'm going to want to store a new pose for this actor. And I'm going to name this right hand open because that's the default. And since that's the open pose, you can see it's now selectable right here, but that's the only pose I have. And I also want to create another new pose, and I'm going to name this right hand closed. And so what I can do here is I can start coming in here and modifying the channel halls, like for instance the finger spread. I want to bring that down. start modifying, maybe not the thumb just yet, but bend my fingers into place here, and we'll get a fist. And oh boy, yeah, that's probably not what we want. I skipped the middle finger, but there we go. So we got the basics of a fist into place there. And now that we've actually posed that, I can switch back and forth between right hand open, right hand closed, and I can switch by setting on set back and forth between these. And let's go ahead, and I actually kind of messed that up ever so slightly, stepped out of order. I've got my right hand open right now, and I'll go ahead and tweak these into place again just to kind of illustrate this to you, the proper workflow. Like I said, I'm not much of an animator, but I can show you all these wonderful, wonderful features that will make your life easier. There is a user on our forums, goes by the name Gamby, and Gamby actually fancied himself somebody who wanted to pursue character art and modeling, things of that sort. He really stayed away from character animation because he felt there was too much involved in learning how to be a great animator. And as of 801, he saw the new spacing chart, and he was like, you know what, I think I'm going to give this character animation thing a try. And so there you go. You have these poses in place that you can start messing around with and playing with, as you can see. And his very first animation that he produced, or animation test that he produced, is up on the forums. One of the things I'm going to do after this webinar is I'm going to create a thread on our forums that you guys can come in and ask some questions on. It'll contain some links back to Motion Media's site as well. But I'll point you to a couple of really great examples, animation-wise, of what new artists are doing, just jumping into this tool set for the first time. And experienced animators are looking at his work and saying, this does not look like beginner work. And the reason for this is because of the ease of setting up animation in Modo using the spacing chart, as you see here. Now, we'll just assume that I've gone through and I've created a whole bunch of different poses that are readily accessible to me. I've got him in like a real dynamic, serious hero pose. And I'll step on over to the next file iteration right here. And what you can see here is you can see key poses. And these key poses are established using the spacing chart, which is really nice in that I can cycle through my timeline. You can see that Andy Brown, the person who created this scene, has gone through and established a basic animation, or the idea for an animation, by blocking it out and just setting up basic poses. We're starting off standing. Okay, we're setting up the transfer of the shield from this hand over to this hand, and then we can get into really interesting things like even dynamic parenting. Like, for instance, how easy is it in Modo to switch parenting of an item like a shield? Because this is something that people for a long time had a very hard time with. Well, dynamic parenting is just awesomely easy. And so as you can see right here, as I'm dragging this out, all I have to do is drag out that handle over to the associated associated bone I want that to reparent to, and I can actually dynamically adjust the parenting of the shield so that now it's able to switch back on over to the other hand. And this, of course, is true as I throw the shield, and then in this case, grab the shield. But nothing is really going on just yet, is it? Right now, all that's actually happening is I've set up these basic poses, and it's only across 5 frames. And for this, section of the animation, you probably, or producing the animation, you probably just want to bring your timeline down just to show those key poses. Because at this point, we can also start adding extremes in between. And so if I want to go ahead and, say, for instance, add a new extreme here, I can go ahead and just toggle on Add Extreme, and if you'll notice what happened there, it actually slid my entire timeline over and added a new extreme pose right here. So I can kind of look between 0 and 1. All right, so how am I getting from this just standing pose on over to this pose where I'm just, the shield is being held up in place? There's probably some things that are
TED
happening.
Talks are recorded live at the TED Conference. This episode features game designer Jane McGonigal. This talk contains powerful visuals. Download the video at TED.com.
Is everybody
Here's
hearing this
Jane McGonigal.
TED Talk video? Okay, so that's turned off. All right, good. Okay, getting back to this, adding extremes. We have right here, I can just click on frame 0, insert extreme, and it's going to insert extreme in between 0 and 1, expanding on over. And so now I can kind of look at this, kind of interpolated, like, all right, so that would be what would happen if there's a keyframe between the two, and go through, cycle through this, take a look at how this is evaluating, and make modifications like, hey, maybe I want the shield to be up in place much earlier, and maybe I want the arm to come over much earlier. So like, for instance, just go ahead and grab this bone right here, rotate that into place, and maybe I want that up just a little bit faster. And so in this way, I can tweak and tune the extreme poses in between my initial poses, refining this even further. And as I become happier with my animation, I will go ahead and close this scene on down and open up the next scene that we have available here. I'll go ahead and come on over to my ACE extremes that are all set up. And you can see we have these extreme poses between our primary poses. And so now we're getting a much better idea of what this character is actually doing. And we're still not dealing with timing yet. We're just dealing with dynamic poses. And another thing that has happened in this shot is a curve has been added with a locator constrained to that curve, and the dynamic parenting is now being attached to that locator. And so as you can see, the moment that the hand actually is in place, or the shield is right in place by that locator, if we go ahead and come on over, this is actually performing a switch between the parenting of the shield to the hand. Back here you can see that parenting on over to parenting to the actual locator, which is running along a curve. So now the shield is going to come all the way around. My character catches it, comes back into his hero pose, and I know much more well now what my character is actually doing. But we still haven't added any sort of timing in place because, well, this is just blocking out the basic forms for our character. And so if I want to go ahead and start, shifting things over, I can go ahead and just select my key poses, my extremes, and go ahead and just start sliding them over. Or I can also, from frame 0, go ahead and add spaces in between, or delete them as well to expand this further, to start working on the timing of the actual scene itself. And we'll open up the next one so you can see that result. And with ACE Extremes timed, you'll notice that now we have some nice space in between here because we want to have the character standing there for a little while, stand for a while looking around, and now establishing, what kind of timing we're going to actually see when running this animation. But there's no animation happening between the key poses and the extremes. Like if I play right now, you can see it just clicks right on over to the next respective keyframe. Nothing's actually happening in between. And the reason for this is very useful for blocking it out, whereas that's really still what we're doing right now. And if I wanted to go ahead and make some adjustments, say for instance, underneath my actions, I can change my interpolation over to stepped, which it is right now. But if I'm actually happy with the timing overall and I want to start to see this all be interpolated, I then can go ahead and switch that right on over to curve, and it's going to seem like we already have a much smoother animation because now it's actually using the curves to interpolate between each of these poses. And so in a very short period of time, you can start to come up with a very highly articulated animation, and one that is very adjustable by using the spacing chart and by using key poses, and also by using extremes to rough out the shape or rough out your animation. Now, beyond that, if you think about it, you want to know while you're watching an animation play, while you're setting up these poses, you also want to know what happened before and what happened afterwards, right? And so what we're going to need to do to show that off is turn on some onion skinning. And so we've got our meshes right here, we've got our body, and we've got the secondary mesh items also. I'm going to select all those items right here. And I want to go ahead and make sure that that is, come on over to actors and make sure onion skinning is assigned to those meshes. And now that onion skinning is assigned to those meshes, I should be able to actually be able to see the onion skinning actually occurring. Oh, I'm sorry, I have to add these selected items. Excuse me. Like I said, I am so not a great animator. But once it's added to that actor, now I can actually see the onion skinning associated with the various animation poses. And you can also set that by coming in here through actors and say, I want to see every single frame step. So I'll set that to 1. And steps in, right now I only have it at 1 and 1, so I'm only seeing 1 frame before, 1 frame after. but I can go ahead and set that on over to say 5 and 5, and now we get this beautiful onion skinning of the motion that our character is creating. And so as we start to cycle through here, we can say, you know what, how am I feeling about this? The positioning there is a little bit awkward, but how is it actually reaching that? And it's coming up, and it's sliding on down and connecting on over here. And so let me go ahead and close this scene on down and come back over to the next scene. And like I said, this is included in the production evaluation for Modo. Like I said, unfortunately, it does cost something. It's $25 that could be deducted towards from a future purchase. But it comes with 6 hours of video, including training on performing this exact animation. And so I'll go ahead and come on over to breakdowns, and we'll take a look at a much more sophisticated animation at this point, which you can see as we cycle through all this. I'll come on over and turn on my onion skinning for my various items. And excuse me, let's go ahead and get the right file, because you can have so many different scenes open at once inside of Modo. So I'll come back over to the character, and again, bind meshes and rigid meshes. Select all those, go through the same process, and go ahead and remove and assign onion skinning so we can see that again. And so now I can view much more complex animations using the onion skinning. And even if I wanted, say for instance, to see over time what a particular bone is doing, if I select that, one bone right there, I'll be able to cycle through, and even as I'm scrubbing, you'll be able to see where that bone is starting from, where it is now, and where it's going to. So by combining that together with the onion skinning, you're able to get a lot of feedback telling you precisely what kind of animation you're producing. And this is based on traditional animation techniques. This is something that we were very cautious to focus on, was how can we improve existing animation workflows while also providing you with methods that are very straightforward, actually. So as I cycle through here, you'll notice a couple things. Like, the way that the arm is moving is very nice. I'm happy with that, but the foot, if I come down here to the foot itself, you can see it's not really lifting off the way I want it to entirely. It's starting to, but not really. And what happened was initially there was actually no bend to this foot as it jumped off. And what was done was using the actual breakdown tool to be able to go in there and modify an action as though, in the same way as though you're duplicating keys. Because you can see a lot of keys right here. And what if, for instance, I wanted that foot to stay flat for a longer period of time? Well, I can go ahead and just select right down here and select that breakdown right here, and just grab in the spacing chart, yank that all the way back to the left, and that'll bring it back to its initial positioning, so it's actually flat. And so I'm able to modify the foot staying in place even longer before it actually starts to release the heel. And same thing right here with frame 83. I can go ahead and tweak and tune this. You see this most clearly articulated actually with the hand right here. But I can make an area stay static while I'm in the process of animating without having to go through the tedious process of duplicating keys, and I get these great identifiers telling me exactly what operation I performed previously. So it allows you to produce very complex animations very quickly. And so I definitely suggest, I will link to these threads in the thread that I mentioned. Recommend you take a look at Gamby's 2 threads on 2 animations. He's done his first character animation and his second character animation. And to see somebody who is completely new to character animation produce something with as high of quality as he produced is absolutely shocking. And it's 801's character animation tools that have enabled that. And so definitely dig in, take a look, and I think you're going to be impressed. A lot of animators are coming over to Modo and kind of shocked at how robust our animation system has become. And so there we go. There's that full animation. And nice, easy, clean, beautiful. All right. So now what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and move on to a couple other cool things inside of Modo that I think are really nice that will make your life a lot easier. I want to close all my scenes down. Thank you very much. No, we don't need to save. I do not want to save over Andy Brown's files, considering they're much better than whatever I'm going to do. All right, so I'll come on over and show off a couple of our UV tools, some really basic stuff. You know, UVs are something that have been around in 3D for a very long time, and they have always been a pain in the butt. And with 801, we improved upon our already existing UV tool set. And so I'll go ahead and open up this scene right here to show off a couple cool things about it. Now, what we did was we created two new UV unwrap algorithms that have been added to 801 that give you more versatility when unwrapping. And we also improved the feedback in the UV viewport. It is so much faster now. You can deal with extremely high resolution meshes, and as well as UV symmetry. That's a big one. A lot of people have wanted really robust UV symmetry in Modo, and we added it as of 801. Whether or not you're using symmetry during the actual unwrap process, or if you're using or trying to add symmetry to an existing mesh after the fact. And let me go ahead and make my active and inactive meshes visible. So another thing about Modo's viewport is that lots of ways to make sure you keep it speedy by deciding what you're displaying or what you're not displaying. And right now we got 5 million polys in this viewport. You can see it's moving really quick. I even have fur and hair displaying using 801's new fur and hair sculpting tools. Something I'll touch on at the end of this webinar, a new fur and hair sculpting workflow that I'm working on that isn't even an actual tool inside of Modo, just something Modo allowed you to do. That in combination with our new hair and sculpting tools is freaking phenomenal. All right, so first off, let's just come over to you know, one of our simple heads. I don't want to use that one. I don't want the parts. I'll use a basic mesh right here just to show the unwrap process. And I want to come into a component mode. As you can see in Modo, we have three primary modes right up here: vertices, edges, and polygons. Those are component modes because vertices, edges, and polygons are components. And item mode. We want to come out of item mode, and we want to come over to edges. And I believe I have a selection set, yes, already established for my unwrapping. So what I did was select these edges along the head to do a fairly standard unwrap. And I'm going to come over to the unwrap tool. This is not a new tool, just a few new methods. We have conformal and angle-based methods of unwrapping. And as I unwrap, you can see, whoa, that's kind of funky. It's not really doing what you might expect. But you get nice feedback in the viewport showing you this kind of red surface down here saying that really what Modo is doing right now is trying to seal holes. And so if I turn that off, you can see you get an unwrap that is probably much more akin to what you're used to seeing. But this is just one method of unwrapping. And you can switch on over to angle-based as well, which, depending upon the type of thing you're unwrapping, conformal and angle-based will give you slightly different results. So you can switch back and forth between those on the fly so you can find out which one's giving you better results. And there's also initial projection options, which I really highly suggest people take a close look at, because oftentimes people just grab our UV tools and don't really mess around with all the different options that we give you. Because lots of unwrap, lots of applications that contain unwrapping tools end up offering, like for instance, a specific pelting tool. Now that's cool and all, but we don't want to just give you one thing saying, hey, this will probably pelt well. We want to give you the whole suite of tools that you can combine together using macros, actually. And so if I wanted to unwrap this character, combining a couple tools together, that being the unwrap tool and UV relax, I could set up a macro here by recording all these actions, and then I have a script that I can run that will fire off a whole bunch of different tools, one after the other, and be able to run a very complex unwrap that could be seen as a pelt. So you can create your own pelting tools, and also, by the way, I do have scripts on the forums that are for pelting that will make your life a whole lot easier. Now, you can see that it did a very nice job of unwrapping, but it's not perfect. And the reason for this is we need to be able to visualize in the viewport how that unwrap is going. And so I just tossed an image onto this UV map. You can see it's displaying how well this is unwrapping. It's doing a pretty good job, starting to fall apart in the front of the face as UVs typically do. But you can have that on as you run the unwrap tool, of course. And oops, I want to come into my edge component mode and unwrap it with the selection in place. And unwrap that, and you can get some feedback, nice feedback as to exactly what your UV map is doing. And let me just make sure I've got the correct UV set up right here. And yes, it is texture. All right. And also, I don't want to have this visible right here, so I will actually change my backdrop over to to none so that we can all see the UV map a little bit more clearly. Now, like I said, it's doing a pretty good job. It's not perfect yet. We also want to use the UV Relax tool because the UV Relax tool will actually relax your UVs, just like it says, but there are multiple modes. You use conformal or angle-based unwrap methods for the UV Relax tool, but I prefer to just use adaptive, and I just set the number of iterations up to 2,000, and it's going to adaptively relax your entire UV map, trying to figure out how to get the polygons all to be the same relative size. And the actual UV Relax in adaptive mode takes 10, 15 seconds to actually run through, but there you go, snap. You can see what a nice job it did of actually taking that initial unwrap that I did and then using the relaxation technique to relax it back into something that is far more uniform. And this can be a one-click process using macros, combining multiple tools together into one. Now, if you'll notice, too, with the Unwrap tool, I could go ahead and turn on Symmetrize, and that will unwrap using the Symmetrize function. But a lot of times, people either forget to turn it on, or they end up having a UV map that didn't have it to begin with. And in this case, it's like, well, what do? I've got to fix the symmetry on my mesh, and that's kind of a problem. So let's say I have to tweak this on over and get that right to about 0.5 along the U, and deselect this center row and select this one. And I've got half of them selected, right? And I also want to loop select the polys right in the center. And I want to edit my UVs, set the value 0.5 along U, and now, as far as this loop is concerned, right in the center of my UV map, right? And I can come back over to this selection, and I actually want to hide that away. And I can go ahead and symmetrize my UVs. And you know what? I want to go from negative to positive. I want it to be along the U direction. And there we go. So we just added symmetry. And now that I have symmetry, and if I turn it on in our UV viewport along U, you can see that now I actually truly have symmetry in place. Now let me show you another old tool. One, I say old. It's a tool that we've had for quite a while. But it's something super cool when you're working with these adaptive relaxation techniques. Something very distinct to Modo. We have constraints. And all I need to do is come over to, say, for instance, the conformal mode, turn on interactive mode, and I want to save my constraints because I want to save them for later. It will hold on to any constraints that you create. And what if, say, for instance, I want to control the way that my mesh is unwrapping? This is great for like hands and stuff like that. I'll go ahead and click right in here, and I created a constraint right there. You can see it created it on the other side as well. And I'll go ahead and create one right here, over here, and in right here, and in right here. Now, this is a tool that I find people oftentimes don't fully understand how to use. They think, okay, well, constraints, I can set these constraints from along the outer edge of my UV map, and then I'll lock those in place, and then I'll relax everything inside. It's not really how these are meant to work. It's almost like rigging. And if I take my number of iterations up, you can see to like 100 or 200 or so, now I can grab any of those constraints and start yanking my UV map around and start tweaking and tuning it into place. And maybe you aren't very happy with the way that a certain area is working. Well, you can go ahead and add more constraints as you're working on it. So there we go. I have a new constraint right there. Say I need to flatten these out a little bit, yank that on down. And for things like hands, oh my God, this is so useful. Like when you have a really great unwrap of a hand, but the fingers are too close together, you can go ahead and rig up the hand the way you would rig up a hand for animation and just start moving it at its knuckles and spreading the fingers apart and things of that sort. So I find this to be an incredibly useful tool for tuning your UV maps, and this is also why I kind of constantly tell people that I think Modo's got the best UV tools out there. I get a couple looks at, they're kind of like, wait, are you serious? Or are you just doing the whole this is your job thing? I really believe some of our tools are some of the best out there because of the versatility that you see right here. All right, so go ahead and drop that. And I'm going to come on over to a frozen version of this mesh, which is actually has all the displacements frozen into it, but also has all the geometry frozen in. So you can see I have 456,000 polygons right here. And if I come over to this UV map, If you have used Modo in the past and you tried dealing with even navigating around the viewport with such a dense mesh, it can be very painful. And one thing that people have complained about was just polygon selection and editing. And as you can see, even with 400,000 polys in the viewport, it maintains symmetry and it has no trouble being able to select and manipulate. And so I'll just go ahead and do a quick lasso selection right here and press the Move tool and move around a mesh that I really shouldn't be editing anyway. There's no reason for me to actually be modifying a mesh this density. But that may be something that you run into where you need to, and so you spend a lot of time improving the performance inside the UV viewport. So when you have these super dense meshes, it doesn't slow down to a crawl. You get the feedback that you need to produce the assets that you need. All right, so let me go ahead and close this scene on down. There are more things to our UV tools. Please, by all means, dig into it. I've made a couple of videos on it in the past. If you want, I'll link to those in the thread as well. Just kind of showing really how to use our UV tool set to your full advantage. All right, so let me go ahead and open up another quick scene, and that is sculpting. Now, we didn't have a massive number of sculpting enhancements with 801, but the enhancements we added are very significant. And since this is a rather dense mesh I'm loading up, it'll take a few seconds. I'll come over to our Paint and Sculpt tab. You can see there's this simple head mesh that I've actually loaded into Modo. It's sculpted in Modo. Lots of things about Modo sculpting tools I think are great. If you want to have a discussion about that, we can. But I'll just show you some of these quick niceties. First off, we have a new brush that is the clay brush. And if I go ahead and use the clay brush on this surface, like right over here on the head, for instance, I'll go ahead and sculpt a stroke right there. You can see it comes up to a fairly even level. And I'll also sculpt a stroke right across here. Now, this is what's cool about the clay brush as opposed to just a simple push brush, is that now as I sculpt in between these two strokes, you can see it tries to actually bring that stroke up to the level of the strokes surrounding it. So it analyzes the mesh around your brush. And this is very useful, being able to fill in gaps, things of that sort. So the clay brush is very useful and very cool. And I'm going to come on over to my fully multi-res version of this mesh and turn on the mesh itself. And if you'll notice on this mesh, if I turn off these curve layers, got a little bit more detail, sculpted in multi-res using Modo, 7 million polys that are currently showing in the viewport, so performance is quite good still. And I'll go ahead and turn on these different layers. These are curves that I've drawn on the surface. And just to kind of show you how I drew these curves on the surface, obviously they're wrinkles, I'll go ahead and add a new mesh item. And I can come over to our topology layout and open up any of our modeling tools. That's one thing about Modo as a whole, is that you can see I'm bouncing around between these various tabs. And these tabs are different layouts that have been engineered for a specific task at hand. Modeling, painting, topology, UVs, you get the idea. But even though you're in a different layout, we also add quick access to other components like since we're in topology. Of course you want access to modeling tools. Of course you want access to sculpting tools. So quick access to these components. And I'm going to go ahead and actually grab, instead of from the actual modeling tool menu there, I'm going to open my curve palette. And what I want to do is I want to sketch curves on the surface. And I want to go ahead and turn on my background constraints. And double-sided, that's, by the way, what I just did there is one of the features of the new snapping options in 801. And geometry constraint type to point. And now what I can do is I can turn symmetry off because I don't want my wrinkles to be all perfectly symmetrical. I can just draw right on the surface of this mesh, creating a curve. And that's how I went about the process of actually creating all those wrinkles that you saw. And I'll turn off my background constraint, come on back over to Paint, and come back over to my low MRes mesh. Now, what if I want to use these curves as something I can constrain a brush to? Now, that's what's really cool about this, is that I can use, for instance, the push brush right here, and I just come down to my tool options for the push brush, and I want to change my curve constraint to background 3D. The reason why I'm choosing 3D is because I actually use background constraints to draw the curves on the surface, But if you just had a curve floating in 3D space between your view and this object, if you set it to background 2D, it will constrain to that curve and project onto the background surface. But just for the things that I use, I find I frequently use the 3D option. And now what it's going to do is it's going to find that background curve, and you can see I'm sculpting on the surface and it's staying constrained. And even if I try and move that brush off the surface, away, it's going to find another curve around it, and it's not going to paint on the in-betweens. And so this allows you to kind of plan out all the wrinkles that you're going to want to produce for a character. It's the type of thing where maybe you have an art director looking over your shoulders like, no, I want the oldest, nastiest, angriest looking grizzled old man possible, and I want to art direct every single freaking wrinkle. This is a way you can do that, and it's a way that it's non-destructive because, if I come back over to the topology tools and I just want to start editing, let's go with these curves down here. I can go ahead and use our topology pen to continue refining and editing those curves while they're constrained to the surface without committing to actually sculpting any of those fine wrinkles into the head. And so the background constraints for curves in the sculpting tool set, it's just one feature for the sculpting tool set, but I find it a massively, massively useful feature. All right, so next thing I want to get on to is node-based shading. Node-based shading, like I said in the beginning, node-based shading is huge. It's something that people have been asking for since we added our shader tree. But the thing is, we didn't add it right away because of how functional our shader tree is. We try to spend a lot of time explaining to people, what the advantages of the shader tree are. But it's highly functional. We didn't want to add just node-based shading because we had that feature already in place. And when we looked at node-based shading, we decided to say, hey, how can we take the advantages of the shader tree and take the advantages you find with node-based shading and kind of combine them into one? I'm going to show you two quick examples here of how to use node-based shading in connection with our shader tree. Because one of the advantages with our shader tree system is that you have a local versus global shading methodology that is just inherent to the tree system. You can put one image at the top of a tree stack and it'll affect everything. Or you can put it inside of a material mask and it'll affect only that material. And so we want to have that tree there, but we wanted to tie in node-based shading to that. And so I'm going to come on down to Martin's node-based shading example down here, which I just think is extremely, extremely cool. And it uses our ray casting nodes to really show some of the advantages. Now, if you'll notice, the scene renders really fast. That's Modo for you. Our renderer and our preview renderer is wicked fast. I mean, this is on a 6-core i7 desktop while streaming to you guys, so very quick. And one of the things I want you to notice is, so we've got a statue. We've got a statue, that is in water, and beneath the water line, there's moss. And so this is the type of thing you would run into in nature where, okay, there's the water line, that's where this moss could actually grow, and you'd have this distinction. And if I come over to our setup layout, we can take a look, more closely what's happening in OpenGL, but we can take a look at the actual node-based shading right here. It's a very simple setup. All we have right here is we have our white marble texture. All right, that's what's on our statue. And we've also got our moss texture. And now we're using some of the new node-based shading nodes, such as color blends, color invert, and the ray type node. And to really be able to let you guys see what's going on here, I will open this up. It would be really cool if you could stream two monitors much more easily, because I rely upon my two monitors. I'm sure many of you guys do too. All right, so just to kind of show you what's really going on here, if I, for instance, were to disconnect these nodes, see, I dropped that right out. Now, none of these components are affecting it. We do not have the marble white texture. We do not have the moss. We do not have the color blending that is occurring with the ray type node. So I'll undo that so that's connected again. Now what happens if we disconnect our ray type? You can see what is happening in the ray type node right here. We have an output that says refraction ray, and it's coming into our invert, which is our input color, outputting that into our color blend as a mask. And then we're inputting the moss image and the marble image. And so the ray type node is going to control where the mask is, which parts are marble, which parts are moss. And so if I go ahead and I disconnect the ray cast node, you can see all we are getting is actually the marble on top of the MOS. You can't see the MOS because there is no mask that is properly operating here. And if I want, I can take that refraction ray now and drop that into the input color. And what is actually happening is it is now just deciding that, hey, because there's a refraction occurring right here, that means any rays that strike this surface that have been refracted are going to produce MOS there. And so really cool. And if I select this object in OpenGL, which you can actually in 801, you can actually select it through the previewer as well, but our locator is down here at the base. If I pull this on down, you can see I can yank this up from beneath the water surface, and it is automatically generating where the MOS shows up on the surface. And this is a very simple shader or simple node setup. I mean, as you can see, not much going on here. You can get very deep into our node-based shading. And one of the things that we realized with our node-based shading is that, well, since this works in our schematic view, which works with our rigging system, you can use a lot of things that are intended for rigging in our node-based shading. And so, I mean, take a look through all these various nodes that can be added in here. I mean, you know, submenus that give you more and more control. Let me show you an example of exactly what I'm talking about when you use rigging components in combination with the node-based shading. And so this is a scene that actually the example was initially thought of by Matt Cox, one of our amazing developers. And I saw this and I'm like, oh my God, I can make seams. That is so incredibly cool. You'll understand what I mean by I can make seams very soon. I was actually working on a character where I was spending a lot of time developing his outfit. He's a superhero, and I was spending a lot of time developing the style for his outfit. And I started looking at a lot of outfits, and I noticed, wow, really it's just lots of cloth panels, and the design of these outfits seem very dependent on seams, on creation of seams quickly and easily. And so what you can do with Modo's node-based shading, if I come over here to the shader tree, you can see I have a incredibly simple shading setup. I just have a base material, and I have two constants above it. And so that base material is being applied to this this car seat right here. And if I make some adjustments just to articulate to those who aren't familiar with the shading system, I can just modify the color really quickly, whatever, nice and easy. Build up very complex shading systems in the shader tree if you want to. But I've got these two constants that are turned off. Now what happens if I turn on the diffuse amount constant? Well, you'll notice I get this strip right here. And it's like, oh, okay, I'll turn that off and turn that back on. All right, cool. It's actually, there's some kind of texturing going on here. And what if I turn on this constant, which is for bump, and I turn off that constant for diffuse amount so you can more clearly see it? That image or that kind of texture of sorts that was being created on the surface is now automatically being used as a bump map instead of just a diffuse amount. And if you take a look at the node-based or the schematic view down here for the node setup for this, what's going on is I have my two constants right here. I have constant 0 and constant 12. So easy to, so well named, right? So anybody can pick up this file. I'll fix that some other time. And it's actually being modulated by a gradient that is using a curve probe, which is generally kind of a rigging tool, to actually detect around the curve where it wants to create this gradient and then pumps that into these constants to produce the diffuse amount and the actual bump shading. And so if I wanted to change the nature of this seam that I'm creating here, and I mean, think about this. This is a bump map. It's really, really precise and accurate. Even as I zoom in here, you can see that the definition still holds up, and the reason for that is because it's being generated. I mean, basically there is no resolution. It's as high resolution as you want. And just to kind of make sure you guys can really see the advantage of this, because this is a very simple curve right here, I'll go ahead and come back on over to, excuse me, let me just modify this really quickly again. Come over to the Topo tab. If I want to grab the topology pen, I can go ahead and continue modifying that curve on top of the surface. You can see that updated in the render previewer. And you can see that it wasn't very consistent. The depth and height isn't really consistent. That's because my curve isn't dense enough. So I'll go ahead and turn on my background constraints, which is already set to point. Subdivide that once, which press the move tool so it actually snaps into place, and turn off my background constraints and open up the previewer again. You can see how nice and crisp and precise that is right there. And I'll come back over to the Setup tab where I can grab this gradient right here. And I now can go ahead and edit this gradient to modify the nature of my scene. And so, seam, not nature of scene, excuse me. This is the gradient that is actually controlling the profile of that scene. And so if I come in and I want to select all those points and I just drag that on over, you can see it updates right there in the previewer. You can see I've separated those two seams apart from each other. And I probably want to bring that on back over because I do want something that's nice and crisp. And what if I wanted to add another keyframe here? For some reason, I wanted a gigantic ridge right there. There you go. You have all this control over developing seams. So even for, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you're designing shoes, if you're designing car interiors, if you're designing characters and character clothing, you know, these curve tools can, especially using it with node-based shading, can really speed up the process of developing ideas and also speed up the process of developing a final asset, because this is entirely bakeable. You can bake this down to a displacement map, a bump map, a normal map, whatever you need. And but while you're developing the initial look, you aren't going to be constantly going back into Photoshop or some other external application developing your textures. It's just all being done right here through the shader tree. And what I showed you with the node-based shading is a very simple example, or these two examples are two very simple examples of the node-based shading. I really don't think we're going to see the full exploitation of node-based shading from users for, I mean, even years to come. I mean, right now it is hugely functional, but at the same time, there's so much you can do. I think people are going to be figuring out new things to do with it just with the current feature set years from now even. And so, I mean, play around with the node-based shading. It is extraordinarily powerful, and a lot of people on the forums are talking about that. Now, one of the last things I want to show you really quickly, even though it's an almost impossible thing to demo, which is rendering, I'll come on over to one of our render demo files, or actually the Spotlight. This another thing that's included in the Spotlight videos with the production production preview or production evaluation. That's it, production evaluation is rendering. And it's just about a 15-minute video that goes through a couple of new features. I don't go through everything about how you render interiors in Modo, but I want to show you just a couple of the nice render features that are articulated by this scene. This is an interior that was created, in Modo. It's nothing all that special. I just wanted to be able to show the bouncing of light around in a scene and how quickly Modo can handle it. Right now, the previewer is abandoning one core because that's what Modo's previewer always does. You can turn on options to tell it to use all threads, but right now it's leaving two cores out so I can get this thing actually rendered. But you can see that it refines very quickly for a scene that has a lot of light bouncing around in it. And one of the things I want to articulate about that is this feature I brought up in the beginning, which is basically hybrid rendering. And there is no place in Modo where you say, I want to use hybrid rendering. You go into the global illumination, underneath the render settings to the global illumination tab here. And if you'll notice that we have irradiance caching. Irradiance caching is interpolated global illumination in Modo. And previously, if you had irradiance caching on, you would use it for first and second bounces, which means you're using irradiance caching for all the bounces in the scene. But if you take a look up here, I have 10 bounces total in the scene. And irradiance caching has some drawbacks. While it's fast, it usually ends up being a little bit splotchier than Monte Carlo and also doesn't capture quite as much detail. Usually it doesn't matter. Sometimes it does. But now you can turn on second bounce only, which says, hey, you know what? We're going to use full brute force Monte Carlo to render this, but we're also going to use irradiance caching for the second bounce and any bounces following. So that first bounce is going to be calculated using Monte Carlo, all the rest of the bounces with irradiance caching, and that way you get the detail, you get the precision that you find with Monte Carlo rendering techniques as you do with irradiance caching, and you end up splitting the difference on the render time there, so you don't end up with an obscenely long render. You also you end up with a render that takes a reasonable amount of time to finish and looks absolutely gorgeous in the end. And that's just one aspect of the render features. We got vertex irradiance caching. We've got all sorts of different additions to even our channels, like for instance boost importance, which will immediately reduce the noise on a surface for especially black surfaces that aren't getting enough rays. The white surfaces then end up gobbling up all the rays. And the black surfaces don't get enough boost importance will actually improve that immediately. And even features like we added environment importance sampling, which again, it improves the quality of renders by sampling your environment if you're using environment lighting, which this is. But we added multi-importance sampling, which also takes into account, it blends the environment importance sampling with standard sampling in a way that allows you to get the benefits of both as well, and it reduces the amount of noise that you find in environment MIS, because MIS, or EIS shading, excuse me, EIS lighting can actually produce more noise, and this is a way for us to take advantage of the higher quality that you get from EIS lighting, and also take advantage of or reduce the amount of noise you get in the very end. All right, guys, so like I showed you in the beginning, there are a lot of features in 801 and a lot to go through. Our webinar almost can't do it justice, really. And if you hop into the forums, you have questions about specific features, I'll do my best to answer them. We'll also, there's plenty of people in the forums to help answer questions for you, and take a look at some of the great stuff we're seeing in our gallery, our work in progress section, our gallery section in general. The things that people are producing in 801 are kind of stunning, and the massive increase in quality that I'm seeing from virtually every artist that shows up there, I really do attribute to the features added to 801. So does anybody have any questions for me from what you saw so far?
Yeah, hey Greg, I'm just going to read off some of people that have posted them throughout. One of them is the Arnold render in the pipeline for Modo?
Well, that's you're asking that question, you already know it's a third-party renderer for those who don't. But I really can't speak to any products that may or may not be coming around in the future. But at the same time, you can see that other third-party renderers have had plugins made for them. So we're always open to other renderers creating plugins for Modo. But hopefully, I unfortunately don't have time right now, but I could show you a demo also that shows 7 trillion multi-resolution sculpted or 7 trillion polygons worth of multi-resolution sculpted characters rendering in the viewport in an interactive manner. And that was actually made to kind of show a demo in contrast to some of the other Arnold demos we've seen in the past. If you're a fan of Arnold, by all means, please check out our renderer, but we really can't speak as to whether or not that renderer specifically is going to be in Modo in the future.
All right, fair enough. This guy coming from Cinema 4D, any MoGraph module-like functionality?
MoGraph module-like functionality, I really wouldn't be able to speak to that. That would probably be a good question for us to kind of crowdsource an answer to that. I do know that a lot of people who deal with motion graphics like Cinema a lot for some of its streamlined workflows. And I do know that some people want more motion graphic specific features in Modo. But yeah, I couldn't speak directly as to whether or not we have some features that directly compare to Cinema in that respect. But if you hop on the forums, we can get that question answered and addressed for you.
Yeah, all right. This one's kind of a long one. This guy, or Ashley, has used Cinema 4D Max for a long time, never did much animation, but want to get into it. Can any of the modeling, keyframing, etc. be ported to C4D? She has V-Ray on C4D, thinking of a workflow, character in Modo to scene with models built in C4D, and then rendering from Cinema 4D out.
Sure. We support Alembic export, which is very robust, and we also support FBX 2013. We support more formats than that, but those are 2 formats we spent a lot of time with that should carry animation information. You also are capable of, I believe, and I'm not sure in the case of Cinema specifically, but FBX and Alembic also will carry over any sort of edge weighting that you do in Modo, because it's a great modeling technique. And also we do support MDDs, so that would be another way to go back and forth between Modo and another package. That is one important thing to clarify here is that we're talking about multi-application workflows, and that is one thing that Modo is really excellent at, especially with the extra work we've done on our importers and exporters, is making sure assets come in and also leave Modo in a state that you can work with other applications.
Okay. Also, this one sounds like from Robert. If you're still on there, maybe you can clarify, but it must have been during a specific portion, but he's asking if you can use this gradient to drive real displacement.
Yes.
Does that ring a bell?
Yes. The answer is yes. Yep, you can. That can actually truly drive real displacement. Now, as you get lots and lots of curves, you've got this probe, this curve probe that is generating a probe around the curve. So the more curves that you have, the more probes that are being generated, and it will get slower. Now, that's part of the reason why I advocate doing it on multiple curves on multiple layers, so you can see the layers independent of one another, and also the final goal being baking it out in the end, because then, of course, you're just dealing with the standard scene. But yes, you can turn that over to a standard displacement, and you can have it just be a bump like you saw previewing the viewport. The bump is, of course, faster.
Okay. Mark Albrecht doesn't have a question necessarily, but sounds like he wants to buy you a beer next time he sees you. So write that down.
Thank you, Mark. By the way, Mark frequents our Modo Steam Edition chat room that is in Steam, if you can manage to find it. But again, I'll put up a thread on the forums to answer any questions from this, and I'll point you towards the Steam chat. We're trying to get more people in there just to talk about 3D for the day and answer each other's questions in more of a live format.
All right, a couple other questions. Does RenderMan integrate with this, do you know?
Well, actually integrate, no. There's no direct integration. But again, there are export options for that. But if you guys have a render engine that you're like, I want to see this render engine in Modo, make some noise. That's something that we are always open to. And if we hear a lot of people want a specific thing, please harass the people who make whatever engine you want to be present, and harass us, because we're craving and listening very closely to feedback.
Okay. Juan is asking, what's the scripting language driving Modo?
Well, the scripting language that we're really promoting right now is Python. That is the way forward. That's the way with all the Foundry products in general, and the libraries that you see as far as other Foundry products. That is something that we are moving towards. Having greater consistency between all the applications. So it's Python, and there are some discrepancies between the various applications, like between Nuke and between Modo. But that is one of our big priorities, is making sure that you can script in the same way in all applications, all Foundry applications. Oh, and in 701, we improved the time for actually we improved this, I guess, the solving time essentially for Python tenfold, and so we really made sure that was the scripting language of choice.
In 801, you mean?
Well, that was actually something we added in 701. And
in
so,
701. Okay.
Yeah,
right.
And so it's a little bit old, but at the same time, it's relevant if you didn't know about it already.
Yeah. Okay. One more. As for the animation, how are the constraints? Can you constrain to mesh and curve elements?
Yes.
Are bones the only way to set an envelope or an envelope?
No. You're able to constrain to mesh items as well and curves. That's no problem whatsoever. In fact, there's a great demonstration of some really advanced rigging in Modo from version 401 when we first implemented our mechanical rigging system that was done by Rich Hury, where he did this tank. And that shows, especially considering it's now 4 versions old, it's half the number of versions that we've released, how potent our rigging system actually is and what high-level stuff can be done, because that's stuff that can be done 4 versions ago, and you can do a lot more now. But yes, simple answer, you can constrain to mesh items and curves.
Okay. And then can you quickly just explain the integration with Nuke?
Well, integration, there's no direct integration with Nuke. One of the things that we wanted to focus on with interaction with Nuke is basically, we wanted to make sure that Color space. We were able to have accurate color space between Modo and Nuke. That was one of the reasons for the work that we did on color in Modo. But I mean, there is no actual physical integration. We are tying all these programs closer together. Like I'm sure many people here have heard about the Nuke Studio announcement, but there is no direct integration. If you want to look at something as far as something that we've shared that shows the direction that we're taking, there was a demo that was done at NAB, I believe, last year that showed actually even bringing in Modo's render engine to be able to, or preview renderer to show it actually rendering in the Nuke viewport being composited onto a background, on the fly. But that is not a feature we are committed to. That was a tech demo kind of showing what we're thinking about and, an idea of how we're going to be taking the connection between all these other applications. Also, Modo Mari interaction has become dramatically better, which I mentioned in the beginning, with the new UDIM workflows that will allow you to treat multiple, say, 80, 100 separate UDIMs for some crazy VFX character or something like that, and actually import them as one single image as opposed to going through and assigning the U and V values for each of them and then making sure they're set for the right properties. Really, I love using Mari, and this makes it actually practical for me now.
Okay, cool. Well, that seems to be all the questions that we have. I'll send out an email with a link to watch this again, of course, and there's a couple people that want your information, so I will send that to them if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure, no problem. And like I said, what I'll do is I'll start up this thread. I'll send that over to you, Brad, the link to that, and I'll also link to a page for your guys' store, and so that we can do a pass back and forth, answer more questions, and let people deal with motion media.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Greg. Awesome as usual.
Oh, thank you. You guys are fabulous.
Thanks, everybody, for showing up. Look for this online in a couple days. Pass it on. Tell all your friends. All right.
801, the future. Have a good night.
That's right. All right.